Welcome to The Authority File, the podcast that features conversations about the life cycle of scholarly communication. I'm Bill Mickey, the editorial director at Choice. So we all know AI models need data and content to continue building their knowledge. And where are they getting this content? The internet, of course. Similar to the way search engines send out bots to crawl the web to index pages and build search results, AI models have been sending out their own bots to crawl pages for data and content for training purposes. What many site owners have learned over the last year or so is this is not necessarily welcome traffic. This activity is so pervasive and constant that sites have actually crashed as a result of what at first blush looks like a distributed denial of service attack. And to add insult to injury, proprietary data and content are often hoovered up to feed AI's insatiable thirst for knowledge. You can see how this poses a unique problem for higher education. Libraries, it turns out, are an especially attractive honeypot for crawlers, and some library systems are being overwhelmed to the point of collapse by AI bots hungry for metadata and repositories full of research. Joining us to talk about her firsthand experience with this unfortunate byproduct of the AI age is Rosalyn Metz, Chief Technology Officer for Emory University's Libraries and Museum. All right, Rosalyn, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
All right, so let's dive right into it. What has been going on, and when did you first notice this increase in bot traffic?
So we've noticed at Emory an increase in bot traffic over the last, I would say, year or so.
Mm-hmm.
The first time we noticed it was actually that it was a day where our system went down and we were like, why is it down? Like nothing, there's been no deploys, nothing's been going on, right? And all of a sudden it was like down. And that's when we noticed it was increased bot traffic. This happened like a few times to us. And then we were like, okay, this is not going to work. Like we can't keep having systems down all the time. We noticed that the rest of the university wasn't experiencing what we were experiencing. So it wasn't related to the university. It wasn't like the university was under a denial of service attack or something.
Right. So so sorry to interrupt, but that's the level of traffic that we're talking about here.
Yeah, it is, I don't want to call it a denial of service attack. Over the last couple of months, I've noticed like we've been talking about in the library technology community, and we don't want to call it a denial of service attack because that's not really their intent, right? They're not, and some bots do a really great job of throttling back how often they're hitting our sites, but some don't, and some don't care. So we noticed this particular attack, and we were like, okay, we need to do something to fix it. So what we actually did was all of our infrastructure, the repository, the catalog, that is all in Amazon. And Amazon has a firewall called WAF, and it has a feature where it does AI learning intentionally to block bots.
Okay.
So we are actually using AI to fight the AI, which I always find hysterical. And so we worked with our local IT team, our university IT team, to implement that because it was a level of protection that they just weren't able to provide us because it was particularly targeted to the application. We've also moved off of their load balancer because that was some of the problem too. Like, okay, if their load balancer is getting overwhelmed, they don't want to block these bots themselves because they're not experiencing the same thing that we're experiencing.
Okay.
So we now have our own load balancer. We have our own firewall. We handle all of that using Amazon's tools to block bot traffic.
Right.
And it is across both our catalog and our repository.
Okay, I was going to ask you, when you say the system went down, how would you characterize that system?
Yeah, I think the first one to go down was actually our catalog.
Hmm.
In conversation with colleagues, we've said, oh, the catalog is like the honeypot. They there are 5 million records. Actually, it's
Yeah.
more than that now. 5 million records ish. And that's a lot of metadata,
Yeah.
right? Like, that's a lot of metadata for any AI tool to be able to learn from. And, you know, usually the way AI training occurs is they want really well structured data. Well, there's nothing more well structured than a library's catalog, right?
Hmm.
That has been crafted over thousands of years.
Right.
So
More or
yeah, so
less.
they started with that. Then they found our repository and started hitting that as well. So
Wow. So the jackpot. So, were you able to identify the type of, because there is sort of, and always has been sort of this standard kind of bot traffic, that kind of sets up the whole structure of the internet. But I mean, were you able to discover or determine the difference with this particular bot traffic versus what you normally see?
yeah, so we see two types of traffic. We see bot traffic, like the regular bots that identify themselves. I'm a bot. I
Yeah.
am. Unfortunately, sometimes that bot traffic we can't distinguish.
Hmm.
My understanding is that Applebot recently released like an Applebot extended, and they've developed a way to say like, don't crawl this AI traffic. And I think Google has a similar one, where it will distinguish between Google just regularly crawling for search results
Hmm.
and then AI traffic specifically. Like, I am crawling you for AI. I want to know about your content so that I can then use it to train my AI models. Some of the bots it's very apparent, right? Anthropic has crawled our site. That is AI. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Um, so they crawled our site, Google, Apple, Alibaba, which is fascinating. Then there is just the IP addresses that aren't identifying themselves as bots that are just crawling our site. So if I were to just say, okay, these are the IP addresses, like going into using Whois or
Hmm.
just Google searching an IP address, you'll discover like AT&T is crawling our website and T-Mobile, and it's like, you're not really crawling our website, right? You're probably hosting. A lot of hosting companies are on there.
Oh, okay.
And so like, they're not the ones crawling our website. It's probably somebody else crawling our website. And so that becomes difficult to determine, okay, what is crawling our website?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's malicious. My favorite was the other day we got a bot or an IP address just crawling our website. And what they'll do is they'll mimic a user by saying like, oh, we're coming from this browser operating system, et cetera, et cetera. But it was spelled wrong. So it was
Whoops.
like, you're not who you say you are.
Yeah.
Like, I think it was like they said they were on Mozilla Firefox or something, but like Mozilla was spelled wrong or Firefox was spelled wrong. And I was like, so yeah, there's like different types of crawling that occurs. The ones that are good and they will identify who they are and you sort of can gauge what they're doing. And then there are the other ones where
Right.
you don't really know what they're doing. They're just crawling your site and hitting it pretty quickly.
Right. And so there's a way for sites to set up, sort of protection against this. And the AI bots in particular have been supposed to have been paying attention to, like, okay, the indication from the content owner, like, we don't want you crawling, XYZ site, but apparently they're just kind of ignoring that, or kind of working their way around it somehow.
Right. This is one of the things. So, you know, we've never set a robots.txt, which is the file that crawlers will look at,
Yeah.
to say don't crawl our site, because it's
Oh.
actually good user experience, right? If I'm on Emory's website, or I'm on Emory's campus and I search for a book, it'd be nice if our catalog came up.
Hmm.
Um, that being said, now we're getting into a situation where maybe we do need to start paying more attention to our robots.txt, because we actually need to distinguish between the bots and saying you are crawling for AI versus you're not. But it's also a question where we get from our users. We had a student go, "Can we get a copy of your library catalog?" No,
Wow.
no. Is that just something you're like, you send in an email? um, but they want that content because they want to use it for training,
Hmm.
training AI models, or doing large language models, or whatever research that they're doing. And so it's a question, right? Like, what do we want to provide this information to these AI tools? Do we not want to provide this information to these AI tools? And unfortunately, because many people don't necessarily have a good understanding of what AI is, or the impact that it can have, because you're getting into ethical questions and
Right.
copyright law and
Mm.
lots. Are we going to have an open internet for everyone? Some philosophical questions too. Like, it's a bigger conversation than just technologists having it, but
So,
because not everybody's educated, it's hard.
right. So are you saying in order to exclude some of the or all of the AI bots, you'd also be excluding, just legitimate traffic to the site, or impacting the user experience, as you said.
I mean, you
So,
could. There are ways that, my understanding, not an SEO expert, so take this with a
mhm,
grain of salt, that you can say don't crawl it for AI.
yeah,
Um, so that's one of the things that we need to look at. However, we're also then assuming that whoever's doing this crawling is going to respect the
yeah,
robots.txt file, which, when you're talking about the people who don't want to identify themselves, they're never going to respect that. That's
hmm,
actually just a cultural norm on the internet. It's not some sort of rule.
yeah.
So, because there
All
are
right.
rules on the internet.
Yeah. All right. So, aside from, the system's literally going down, which is, a serious consequence here, what are some of the other, worrisome aspects of this activity that you found?
One of the worrisome aspects, and the first one that came to mind when I realized, we were getting crawled by bots for AI, is this something we're allowed to do?
Hmm.
And a lot of that came up for me because of some of the lawsuits that have been happening with OCLC in the metadata space. Anna's Archive, their suit against Clarivate, those sorts of questions come up, right?
Hmm.
If OCLC sued Clarivate, are they going to sue us for allowing these bots to crawl our catalog? Or are they going to start suing these companies, which would, that might be nice, for taking this metadata, that is structured. It's interesting. I tried to last week have a conversation with ChatGPT about why would this list of companies that I have crawl our website. And ChatGPT kept saying probably for search engine optimization, analytics, or AI, right?
Okay.
Saying, but all those things are really related to one
Yeah.
another. And I said, okay, what were you trained on? Like I started asking you questions like, well, I can't divulge what I was trained on. But I was trained on things like Project Gutenberg, Wikipedia, journal articles, right? And I kept saying it actually did reference Alma and WorldShare as well. So I
Really?
thought that was
Wow.
really interesting. And it said to me, like, we do not break license agreements that organizations have with Ex Libris's Alma or OCLC's WorldShare. It said, we don't have access to the data in those systems. And I said, but do you understand the data? It's so funny. I'm talking about my conversation with ChatGPT. Do you understand that the data in those systems just gets publicly displayed in the catalog? Yeah, I do, but we don't break the license agreement.
Wow. Okay.
And it was just an interesting conversation to have because it sees it as, well, you put it on the web, so it's there for everybody to see. How can you? It's sort of like, how can you stop me from watching, like looking at it? You can't. Unless you've put something in your robots.txt to say that. But of course, when OpenAI was probably originally crawling, we didn't even know that this was like, oh, right, that's what they're doing. So it is an interesting ethical dilemma in some ways, right? We've done all of this work for thousands of years, libraries, to create this metadata. And now these companies are benefiting from that thousands of years of work from hundreds, if not millions of people who have been doing this work for, as long as libraries have existed. So we talk about the workforce issues related to AI. There was a really interesting 60 Minutes piece about individuals who are tagging images and content.
Right.
And the ethical issues of that. Some of the content that they're viewing is not so great. But this is also like, is it okay to take somebody else's work and reuse it for, your purposes? I think that's another ethical question to bring up.
Yeah. So are you most concerned with the metadata, or are they getting at sort of text level content as well, like journal articles or book content, that kind of thing?
So this is a conversation I had last week with one of my lead head of software development for my team. Right now, our repository does not have full text searching. That is not a feature that we supply our users. It is a feature that they asked for. And my worry is when we turn that feature on, what are we unleashing for AI? Are they going to then be able to crawl all of our content and read letters and other things that are in our repository?
Right.
And I am particularly concerned about this because one of Emory's big collections focus is on the African American experience. And as a primarily white institution, have we fully thought through what this would mean to the African American experience in the world, right?
Right.
So that is a concern that I have. We are on the verge of launching an updated open access repository in Blacklight in the Severa framework, so blacklight front end, that would then make visible all of our university's research that is in that open access repository. We have theses and dissertations. I worry sometimes about the access to theses and dissertations. I know there are theses and dissertations that we have intentionally held back for reasons.
Right.
And, you know, that makes me worried. So mostly because sometimes students always don't do things properly. For example, I've heard a story of another institution where a student put in their theses a list of social security numbers, and then whomever said, "Don't do that, right? It'll get indexed." And so they're like, "Cool, I'll take it out." And what they did was they highlighted it all and made it white.
Oh.
But the text is still there. Like you so it's like no, you got to actually delete it all. But like
Man.
those are the things, right? Like, are we really vetting everything that gets deposited? Because the students have to deposit as part of their
Right.
requirement to graduate. So those are some of like the issues that I think about with like stuff getting out there and what the AI is crawling within this content that we have provided to our researchers, to the academic community, to other academic communities.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned sort of like this phenomenon is happening, kind of unique to the library systems and not necessarily campus wide. So does that mean you're now having to kind of I'm just wondering, who you're now communicating with to address this problem, and is there a broader awareness across campus or with administration and so on, that this is something that's serious and needs to be talked about?
So, interestingly enough, there is a bot. The other types of bots, aside from search, SEO types of bot, there are bots out there that will sweep sites for security purposes.
Hmm.
We found one of those bots was also crawling our site while another one was crawling our site for search, AI, whatever it was doing. And we reached out to security and said, "Hey, this bot is like, can you throttle the bot back?" And they're like, "Actually, the bot doesn't have a way of doing that. They partner with like a third party."
Hmm.
And so we're like, "Okay, well, we're going to block this bot, right? Because if, you know, you can't throttle it, but like Google can, it's okay if Google throttles, but like we're going to let them in because there's use for that. And
Hmm.
we'll just have to work in other ways to make sure like security stuff is happening." So they're aware that we're crawling. Our university doesn't have a denial of service posture for specific, sites on the or applications within the university, right? Because it's just happening to us.
Hmm.
My understanding from others is they're in similar boats. I have heard that there was another library technology leader like myself who went to their university IT, and their university IT said, "We can't help you with it. Like, we don't have the capacity to help you with this."
Hmm.
They did partner, my understanding, with a third party vendor who was like, "Wow, this is fascinating." They're used to sort of doing this sort of thing. And they were like, "Wait, a library catalog, fascinating, right?" Because our staffs just aren't big enough to handle this sort of situation. If university IT isn't big enough, library IT is not big
Yeah,
enough.
exactly. So what are you able to do at this point? Just kind of watch it or?
Yeah, I mean, implementing the firewall, the WAF
Hmm.
in Amazon, that has been a huge help because it will auto block things. we have paging services, of course, for our applications, although I've learned not all libraries do that. But we have paging so that if our services start to get really slow, our staff get paged and then they can go in and see, is it not a bot? Is it something else? An IP address that we need to block?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing that we've been doing. One of the projects that my team has coming up is more robust monitoring, alerting, error logging. That's something that hopefully will help out with this if we can do a little bit more robust monitoring, error logging than what we have been doing.
Mm-hmm.
I also know that there's a couple of libraries who have actually been posting jobs for security people, because this really falls into the domain of how do you make your infrastructure robust and secure, and having somebody who thinks about that could be really, really useful.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, at least in the higher education space, well, actually everywhere on the planet, budgets are not what they used to be. So
Right.
adding a position means trying to take away. And, I don't know if that's possible for us. The institution that I've heard who more recently hired one has a very robust university budget. So, yeah, those are some of the tactics that we've been trying. I know of one institution that just said no bots are allowed to crawl our website, but they
Mm-hmm.
still run into problems because there are organizations
Just
that
ignore it.
just ignore it, right?
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about, as far as like in terms of, I guess, organizational structure, like, particularly with IT, some libraries don't have their own IT teams, they rely on campus IT. What kind of advice, I guess, would you provide for folks like that? Or, what kinds of, internal organizational structures lend themselves to kind of better communication around issues like this?
Yeah, I would say one of the things that I've done some consulting for a couple of university library IT units. And I'm very careful to tell them, like, if you're building something on your own, you really need to make sure that you have a robust and sustainable IT team.
Yeah.
You can't do it anymore with one person. It's just not that's not possible. From conversations that I've overheard with vendors, I know that they're dealing with this, but they have much more robust IT teams. So, partnering with a vendor is sometimes the best way to avoid this, because then it's on them to deal with that.
Right.
Um, the other thing I think too is adopting some of the IT best practices out there in the universe. Um, that's one of the things that my team has been doing a lot of, is really honing in on good IT practices. ITIL, which is an IT framework, is one way to start. Monitoring and alerting is oftentimes part of that. Change
Yep.
management, helping to be able to figure out, okay, when is it something related to the infrastructure versus when is it related to the bots attacking you.
Hmm.
So we have network graphs that sort of that show us how many people are on our site. We are using Amazon CloudWatch to help with that.
Okay.
But all of that, I think, is helpful from a technology perspective. I think the other thing is advocacy. And unfortunately, there was an interesting report put out many years ago by Dale Askey and Lisa Hinchcliffe. And the two of them talked about from the margins to the middle. It was about IT teams and how they are integrated into the library's infrastructure. And IT teams are often pushed to the margins. They're not really seen as core, or IT skills are not always seen as core to the library's work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that needs to change. I think more and more, I mean, we live, it's 2025, technology is not going anywhere. You really need to understand technology in order to understand some of the information issues that are happening. Things like really understanding why AI wants metadata. Why
Right.
is metadata an important thing for AI? Why is AI trying to crawl and find large data sets? Why are they trying to access open access copies of journals? You know, we in libraries believe that information should be free, but what is the impact of making that information free?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there needs to be some education around what the impacts are in today's society, of the lack of knowledge around technology. And I also want to be clear, I'm not saying that this is a library problem. We could talk about the lack of technology education in the United States of America. That is a problem. That is a
Sure.
huge problem.
Yep.
But I think we can no longer sit back and hope that somebody else is going to solve that problem for us.
Mm-hmm.
We need to start doing the work to really educate the workforce to understand these issues so they can be more up to date and speak intelligently on why this is important.
Right. Excellent. Fantastic. Well, Rosalyn, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
You just heard from Rosalyn Metz, Chief Technology Officer for Emory University's Libraries and Museum. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's Advertising Director, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant, Ashley Roy. That's all for this month. Thanks for joining us.